I want to share with you the work of the Savory Institute. I'm the CEO of the Savory Institute. Savory Institute is dedicated, tell me how to move this one, just this one, to the large-scale restoration of the grasslands of the world. So we're going to look at regenerative agriculture through the lenses of grasslands.
Stand.
I'm happy here. Do you want me to stand, guys? I'm fine here. There you go. So, I would like to define regenerative agriculture as we see it as the production of food and fiber from the world's lands that results in the regeneration or creation of ecological wealth, social wealth, and economic financial wealth simultaneously, both short and long term. One cannot be compromised for the other one. And I would like to ask you to frame agriculture in its significance, not as a sector of our economy, but as the underlying economic activity that has enabled all others to exist. So if agriculture fails, civilization as we know it fails. And currently it's following those funny shapes that Kate shared with us yesterday, and in that way it will fail. So let's look at what it means to be regenerative when we look at agriculture. And it all starts with this amazing process of photosynthesis in which we tap into this infinite source of energy from the sunlight by growing plants that are able to turn that energy into sugars that will feed all life above and below the ground. So tapping into this key process is the entry point to untapped potential for abundance. I'm going to move away from practices. I believe practices and best practices that we tend to go to are very context specific. So the same practice that is a best practice for me as a Colorado rancher today under these conditions is not the best practice for a herder in the Masai Mara or for me next year. So moving away from best practices or tools or tactics and looking at some principles, underlying principles of regenerative agriculture that we can use to test the appropriateness or the fit of different practices and tools and tactics in any one given context. So the first of these principles is diversity. So diversity of species and genetic diversity within species. As we increase the number and the diversity of species, we are increasing also exponentially the relationships, interrelationships between them, and that brings complexity to the system. And that complexity brings resilience to the system. So practices that move us towards higher levels of diversity will bring resilience to our agricultural systems, and those that will move us towards, move the system towards simplicity in favor of efficiencies of scale, for example, will be degenerative by design. So diversity. The second one is soil health. And fortunately, in the past year or so, soil has taken a central role in all kinds of political agendas, from climate change to food security, water security. So that is very good. We're talking about soil. Soil health, living soils start, the earliest warning indicator is soil surface condition. And the best surface condition is for the surface to be covered. So practices that cover the ground research shows that immediately will increase, will start picking biological activity in the soils, carbon sequestration, and water follows carbon, so water infiltration. And all that feeds life into the system. So soil health starts with cover soil surface. So practices that cover the ground are good. Practices that tend to leave the ground bare, which is typical of our current agriculture, will be degenerative by design. And the third one is that in the cycle of life, from birth through growth and feed and death, and eventually the return of the dead material back into the soil, that process needs to be highly dominated by biological processes versus chemical and mechanical. So any practice that will tap onto and activate or reactivate the naturally occurring biological processes in the soil will be regenerative by design. So if we were to embrace these three principles and test all tools available to us in our context to see if they do that for us, we would be regenerating our souls in the process and our ecological wealth in the process of feeding ourselves with better food and creating profitability. All this results in increased productivity and profitability. In the grasslands of the world, so if you think of industrial agriculture, you can see we're violating all these principles, right? And in the grasslands of the world, which is a third of the land surface, it contributes to food and fiber for all of us, and is the source of livelihood for over 1 billion people around the world. Plenty of huge amount of people living in pastoral communities in which grasslands are the only source of food and livelihood for them, and livestock as the only way in which those grasslands can be turned into food and fiber. These grasslands have been degraded. And those three principles, soil cover, biological decay, and diversity, have been diminishing and loss. This is what we call desertification, is the loss of biological diversity, the increase of bare ground, and the lack of those biological processes feeding the system. And that use was triggered when we lost, or with the removal of the large herds of wild herbivores that co-evolved with these grasslands for eons, and were replaced by sedentary livestock, low numbers, interacting with the grasslands in a different way. So now we have a great opportunity, and that's the work that we've been doing with the Savory Institute, based on the work of Alan Savory. Through holistic plant grazing, we can now use livestock, herds of livestock, as a proxy for these wild herds of herbivores to reactivate, reestablish those decay processes in these grasslands during the dry time of the year. Microbiological activity at the soil level ceases to exist. So these plants that have grown during the growing season, now they are oxidizing, chemical processes take over. And so it was the moisture and the microbes in the guts of these ruminants that would decay back into the soil and feed this life back into the soil. When we remove that biological decaying organism and replaced it with mismanaged livestock, we lost that ability to continue to promote life in these landscapes. Livestock is not good or bad, it's a tool at this point, is how livestock is managed. Through holistic plant grazing, we're able to bring a myriad of management considerations that embrace and foster the complexity we need to create. It restores that biological cycle, and it prepares soil surface conditions to absorb water, absorb carbon, and create the conditions for plant germination. So this is what we're doing. This is the planning process. It's also the implementation of it is very context specific. Again, it's not the same how we work with people in the United States or in Australia, or people in the Masai Mara or the Gauchos in Patagonia. So the beauty of it is that all the knowledge and all the traditions and all the intelligence in these communities can be put to work to implement a process that is very intelligent and is very strategic and embraces those three principles we talked about. So very context specific. This is in Georgia, this is in Patagonia, and I'm looking in the other side. So, but the outcomes are quite consistent across contexts. And what we have seen is the biological diversity coming back, soils being covered, carbon being sequestered. We have now research showing the incredible potential of grassland soils to sequester carbon and act also as a contribution to mitigation practices for climate change, water security, and the such. This is in Australia, this is in Wyoming, and this is in South Africa. So different contexts, the outcomes are the same. Those those processes get put in place. So we have two ways in which we are trying to scale these. One is understanding that because it has to be context specific, this knowledge needs to be deployed in ways that make sense for those communities that use livestock as a tool for food production. And so we use a network design, our strategy of hubs around the world. We're working in partnership with communities, people, solutionaries in different parts of the world. We equip them and train them to become the change agents in their own regions. They work with hundreds and thousands of pastoralists and livestock producers around the world to create these results that we saw. We are at 30. Our goal is 100 by 2025, influencing the management of 1 billion hectares of land. That's our big, audacious, here you go, 1 billion hectares, which is a fifth of the grasslands of the world, but that's our first bite. And then we'll have and I'll talk to you later, how we accelerate this shift towards practices is all of us. And it was said yesterday, how can we all be part of this? Well, let's get informed are the impact and ways in which we, the food that we purchase, is it creating these outcomes that we want to create? Is it addressing these principles we want to create? So we have the Land to Market program. I'll be happy to talk to you about that as an accelerator force in which all of us have now an opportunity to send the signals that this is the type of food and fiber that we want produced in this way. So thank you.